All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this program tonight. My name is Pat Kane, Public Programs and Visitor Services Coordinator at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this program tonight, discussing our new online exhibit, Hearts and Flowers. I want to especially thank tonight's presenter, Barb Garvey, for providing our program tonight. And Barb is going to be joining us in just a few short moments. Before we get into tonight's program, I did want to go over a few housekeeping items and let you know what's coming up at the Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District in the near future. First, let us know where you're watching from by writing down below in the comments section where you're tuning in from tonight. Katie's tuning in from Urbana. Hey, Katie. And Norma is tuning in from Fulton County, Illinois. So thank you two so much for joining us tonight. Let us know where you're watching from down in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, always love to see where folks are tuning in from for these virtual programs. A little bit about us. If you never heard of the Museum of the Grand Prairie, it's your first time interacting with us. Museum of the Grand Prairie opened originally in 1968 as the Early American Museum, and our current mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County and East Central Illinois for all generations. We're part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, County Forest Preserve District here in East Central Illinois. It's a collection of 7 beautiful forest preserves, 2 educational facilities, including our museum, as well as the Homer Lake Interpretive Center, Homer Lake Forest Preserve, a golf course, Kickapoo Rail Trail, and so much more. So check out local forest preserve if you're local here in East Central Illinois, here at CCFPD. Also, we would love to get your feedback. We would love to hear from you after tonight's program. So what I'm doing right now is I'm dropping a link to a survey in the comment section down below that I just put in there. This is a simple program survey. Let us know what you thought about tonight's program, and then also let us know what types of things you would like us to see do programs about in the future. If you're interested in learning about more historical topics, or you have an idea for a program, include that in this program survey. We want to hear from you. Should only take about 5-ish minutes of your time. And again, just follow that link that I dropped there in the comment section. A few programs coming up in the near future. One happening this Sunday, February 13th. Program titled Happy Birthday, AB Baby, Lincoln's Aging Face. And our presenter tonight will join us again on Sunday. Barb Garvey is going to present this program where she will discuss how the new invention, the photograph, and individual photographers with differing skills captured Abraham Lincoln's character at different phases of his life, since Abraham Lincoln's birthday is coming up in the very near future. And then also we'll pay particular attention to the Altshuler portrait that was taken in Urbana. So that program, again, is on Sunday, February 13th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, it will stream live on our Facebook and YouTube pages, much like tonight's program. On Thursday, February 17th, next Thursday, we're going to have another program in our annual Garden Speaker Series. This year's Garden Speaker Series, the theme for it will deal with medicinal plants, how humans have used them throughout history, and how to start a medicinal plant garden of your very own. We'll have individuals from the University of Illinois Chicago's Atkins Medicinal Plant Garden, which is a medicinal plant garden at the University of Illinois Chicago, a part of the College of Pharmaceutical Sciences. They'll talk about that medicinal plant garden, as well as give a presentation titled Medicine and Materia Medica in the Illinois Country, talking about how humans have used medicinal plants in the Illinois area for a long time. So that program will be on Thursday, February 17th, live on our Facebook and YouTube pages at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. One other thing to let you know about, the CCFPD Snowflake Search began on January 20th and is currently taking place. We've hidden 40 creatively painted snowflakes along with winter-themed fun facts throughout Champaign County for you to find in forest preserves located throughout the county. The search will take place all the way through the end of February. So if you're local, get outside this winter time as the snow is melting away here from the huge snowstorm that we had this last week. Get outside, explore local forest preserves, see if you can find some snowflakes, and participate in the snowflake search by taking a picture and posting it on Facebook and Instagram using the hashtag CCFPD snowflake search. You can check out that hashtag to see snowflakes that other folks have found and the fun that people are having with this year's snowflake search. For more info about these programs and everything else happening at the Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or visit museumofthegrandprairie.org or ccfpd.org. Again, let us know where you're watching from if you haven't done so already. I have some more folks tuning in tonight. Karen from Logan County says hello. Susan from Northern Michigan tuning in tonight. Paul from Mahomet, and Lois from Urbana. Thank you all so much for tuning in tonight for our program. And enough of me talking. Let's bring on our presenter tonight, Barb Garvey. Let's bring on Barb here. Hey, Barb, how you doing?
Good, Pat. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can see you and hear you.
Okay, great. We can see you and hear you loud and clear as well.
Hopefully not too loud.
You sound great. You sound perfect. Again, I want to thank Barb for presenting tonight's program, and I'm going to introduce Barb real quick, and then I'll turn the show over to her. So Barbara Olschlager Garvey is the director of the Museum and Education Department at the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. This includes overseeing operations of the district's educational facilities and their staff, which includes the Museum of the Grand Prairie at Lake of the Woods Forest Preserve and Mahomet, which focuses on local cultural and natural history at the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, and the Homer Lake Interpretive Center at Homer Lake Forest Preserve, which focuses on the natural world in Champaign County Forest Preserve District, as well as other environmental education. Prior to becoming director of the department, Barb served as curator of the museum for 12 years. She received her bachelor's in anthropology and art history from Indiana University in Bloomington and has a PhD in art history from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Barb is originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, and is a big fan. Yeah, Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh, yeah, well, it's football.
And is a big fan of baseball and the Cincinnati Reds. Her other passions include all things local Abe Lincoln history and spending time with her beautiful family. So without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Barb Garvey. Thank you so much, Barb.
Thank you, Pat. So I'm here to talk tonight about the quilts of Dorothy and Stanley Rankin. And the first thing I'd like to do is I'm going to talk to you tonight through a PowerPoint. But the first thing I want to do is show you our virtual exhibit so you can spend more time with these quilts. Because we just opened the virtual quilt exhibit yesterday. Well, actually, it was supposed to be today, but we were messing around. So, so let's see if we can do that, Pat.
Sure.
Wait a second. I'm going to do it from the Museum of the Grand Prairie page because that's the easiest way to get there. So, where did I lose you, Pat? Sorry. Oh, okay.
No worries.
This open. This stuff is great when it works, right?
That's right.
Okay. Am I getting anywhere here?
I am not seeing anything on my end. Have you tried sharing your entire screen if you're able to do that?
Here we go.
There we go.
So if you go to the Museum of the Grand Prairie.org, and you go to Explore Exhibits. And all the way down at the bottom of the page is Textile Traditions, the Quilts of Stanley and Dorothy Rankin. And if you hit Learn More, you will see the entire exhibit. So it starts out with telling you about Stan and Dorothy Rankin. And then each of the quilts is listed. There are 30 quilts that we talk about. All of them made by Stan and or Dorothy Rankin. And then at the end, there's a little bit more about the Illinois Quilt Research Project and how to learn more. So I'm going to show you one quilt, let's say the Blue Butterflies quilt.
Hey, Barb, I should just say that we're only seeing the exhibits page on museumofthegrandprairie.org. So I think when you clicked on Learn More, it potentially opened up another tab, which then is not being shared.
Yeah, let me share that. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
Doing the best we can here. So you hit that Learn More button, and then
you might have to, stop share and then reshare.
Well, I don't know. Oh, technology. Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing it. Let's let me close my. I keep trying.
Sure.
Guys, everybody. No, it doesn't want to show that. Oh, well. Let's.
And I did drop a link in the comment section. I linked the exhibit, the virtual exhibit for folks to check out. So
yeah, let's just say go look at that. And we'll get started with the PowerPoint in a second.
Sure. Okay. Yep, that link will take you directly to that exhibit that Barb was pulling up. Again, it could easily be found on museumofthegrandprairie.org. Just go to our exhibits page, and on the right-hand side, there's a section for online exhibits. You find the exhibit talking about quilts, and that will take you to Hearts and Flowers, subject of tonight's talk. So, Barb, we're seeing your PowerPoint. Good to go.
There we are. Good. So if you just go to Explore Exhibits, you will find the website, and you can see all 30 of the quilts. I only talk about 15 of them tonight because there's just too much to talk about. So Stan, we're featuring the quilts of Stan and Dorothy Rankin because they were prolific quilters, and they were involved with the Museum of the Grand Prairie for a long time because they came to us when we were doing the Illinois Quilt Research Project, which is a project that the museum embarked on in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and actually ended up registering about 12,000 quilts in those years, and then in subsequent years registered another 8,000 quilts. So 20,000 quilts were registered, meaning they took photographs of and descriptions of and as much family information as people could recall about these quilts. And all that data is now stored at the Illinois State Museum, but the Museum of the Grand Prairie, which was once the Early American Museum, did that work. They did that work all over the state of Illinois with lots and lots of volunteers. And Stan and Dorothy were among those volunteers. Stan then Stan and Dorothy became quite involved with the museum. And eventually, when Stan passed away, he left a significant bequest to the museum, for which we are extremely grateful. And the opportunity arose to create a virtual exhibit of some of the quilts that they made. Stan had donated his quilts to the Japan House, who sold them to support the Japan House. But before that happened, took several photographs. And so this is an exhibit based on those photographs. Stan was born in Champaign. He graduated from the University of Illinois in accounting and management and worked his way up through the ranks at the U of I until he was working in this Swanland building at the end of his life. He loved history, and he worked tirelessly at the Monticello Railway Museum. And this is Stan at the bottom right of this slide, by the way. And also with us and at the Japan House. And he was also quite a devoted supporter of the Boy Scouts. And his mother was born in Mattoon. She was a bookkeeper as well. And during World War II, she was a very active Red Cross volunteer. She was also deeply involved in the Boy Scouts and loved history a lot. And she passed away in 1996. I think Stan passed away in 2018. The reason I think that this makes a great quilt exhibit is because the career, if you will, of the Rankins covers kind of the arc of quilt making in the 20th century. So in the beginning of the 20th century, people are piecing quilts together, doing almost everything by hand, and using traditional patterns. A lot of these are applique quilts. Very few of them are embroidered. The middle of the 20th century, there are a lot of quilt kits, and people work from the kits. Sometimes they work from predetermined patterns. And so we have a lot of quilts in the Rankin collection from that era. And then at the end of the 20th century, there's more kind of creative quilting. A lot of it is machine quilting, but it's making up your own patterns, not necessarily paying as much attention to the traditions. Sometimes the traditional elements are incorporated. So we have all these kinds of quilts in the Rankin exhibit, and they made them, or someone in their family did. So I'm going to kind of follow that timeline. We'll first talk about a few of the traditional quilts, then about the quilt kits, and then about their original productions. The one on the left here in this slide is a Drunkard's Path, and that's a early 20th century quilt. The one in the middle is called Blue Butterflies, and I want you to notice that that's counted cross stitch. A lot of these quilt kits are counted cross stitch quilts, following traditional patterns, but doing it in a different way. So where they might have been pieced in the early years, later they are either embroidered or counted cross stitch, using the same patterns. And then the last one is a total creation of Stan's, and it's a University of Illinois themed quilt, which we'll look at quite a bit more detail later. Okay, here's the Drunkard's Path quilt. Drunkard's Path quilt was made in the 1920s by a member of the Rankin family. It's a block quilt with a cream-colored background and red appliques. The pattern is known as the Drunkard's Path because it zigzags probably like an intoxicated person. It has other names: Solomon's Puzzle, the Mill Wheel, Wander in the Wilderness, or Rob Peter to Pay Paul. And while this pattern was first seen in quilts in the 18th century, probably, it's this kind of odd key pattern is goes back to Rome. But it was a very popular pattern in the early 20th century. And there's some indication that because it was popularly called the drunkard's path, it was made by women who were anti-liquor, part of the temperance movement, which was also part of the suffrage movement. There's a tiny little bit of documentary evidence to support this, but I do like that notion of women expressing themselves through their quilts without even political opinions. Like, you got to get rid of the alcohol if you want to be able to vote. So this was definitely not made by Dorothy or Stan, but probably by a member of their family. We're thinking probably Dorothy's mother. Another quilt probably made by a member of the family. Dorothy would have been too young to make this one, I think, although I dated this as the 1920s, but it is actually from 1935. This is a grandmother's fan quilt. And Grandmother's Fan was first published in books in a ladies' art catalog in 1897. Before that, fans were used in crazy quilts, but they weren't isolated motifs like this is. And you can see these are like pie wedge shapes, but they are meant to look like fans because each of the tiny little segments is a different patterned material. The two of these quilts were made. Well, that previous quilt and this one were not made by Stan or Dorothy. The thin strips of solid or calico cloth are in varied colors, and then the bottom of the fan is also in varied colors, alternated very carefully. As you notice, it's blue, purple, green, pink, yellow, and red at the bottom of the fan. So she or he were very very systematic about it. And then the tops of the fans are these little strips of possibly this was a way to reuse scraps. The crazy quilt, the scrap quilt, the grandmother's fan, and the Dresden Plate quilt were all ways to use up small pieces of fabric. Notice the small piece of fabric on the right, and those little pieces of fabric are all flowers. I promised you hearts and flowers, and here they are. But the flowers are kind of stylized, and they're very recognizable. If you look at these over time, they're very recognizable as 1930s fabrics. And we know that 1930s fabrics are oftentimes come from feed sacks. Grain dealers. Remember, this is a time when agriculture was so much more of American life, and grain dealers were observed that women would take home these flour sacks, even in the 19th century, and bleach the heck out of them, and then reuse the fabric for undergarments, for possibly for blouses or aprons. And so they started creating flour sacks or feed sacks in brightly colored patterns so that women would be able to use them. And this was particularly popular in the Depression. And so this is actual feed sack on the right, and on the left is an earlier feed sack that was just plain fabric. But if you had to make your own fabric or reuse some fabric somebody else made, you're going to reuse some fabric somebody else made. So that's how that came about. These feed sacks were commonly also used in aprons and in children's clothing. So here's a feed sack apron. Isn't it beautiful? And a child in just what happens to be striped feed sack material. Dorothy and Stan made two what we would call traditional quilts, so pieced quilts, hand quilted, and we believe that both of them were made from earlier fabrics and not finished until later. Anybody who's made a quilt knows that sometimes you have the fabric for years and you don't get around to making the quilt until many, many years later. And this seems to be the case with these two Dresden Plate quilts. A Dresden Plate quilt has many, many petals, if you will. It's not actually a flower, but has many, many petals and then a circular center. This one has 4 across and 5 down, so 20 plates. This is calico, typical of feed sacks. I'm not sure whether it was made from feed sacks or not. A powder blue grid separates each block. There's an off-white border, but there's no binding. There's another, this Dresden Plate was made in 1973, but this one was made in 1996. And I think you can tell that this one was made from feed sack material. So this one was completed even later, but made from very early materials. The reason we call it a Dresden Plate is because it copies Dresden, China. Dresden in Germany is in the very far east of Germany, almost to Poland. And it had a particular kind of very hard bone china, porcelain, that had plates that had this kind of lobed appearance. Let me show you that. There you go. Even to the point of having the scalloped borders. And so whether it was actually copied or whether it was just called that because of how it looked, we're not sure. But these are both quilts that were made hand quilted by Stan and or Dorothy. We're not positive. Some of these quilts are signed by Dorothy. Some of them are signed by Stan, but some we're not sure about. All right, so those were the traditional quilts, the handmade quilts. Now we move on to what we would call quilt kits. Sometimes the quilts were made from stenciled patterns. Sometimes they were made from a kit where all of the materials came. Sometimes they were made from something that was pressed onto to a piece of fabric, and then you purchase the thread to do it with. But this particular one, the Tree of Life quilt, we're going to start out with quilts that are applique quilts, and then we'll end up with quilts that are cross-stitched or embroidered. The Rankins made this quilt from a Progress Quilt Company kit, number 1492. It was extremely popular and was first sold in 1930, and then again in 50, and then in 60, and 66, and 85. And this quilt is signed and is dated from 86, so I'm assuming they bought it in 85. It's bound with blue thread. The edging is scalloped. I got to tell you, this is the kind of quilt that my grandmother made that was on every bud in my family's house, I think. Not necessarily its pattern, but this kind. At each corner, there are 2 applique flower stems, a larger yellow flower and a smaller blue flower. The central motif of the quilt is a tree. It's a very floral tree, but it's a tree. It stands on a ground of stylized, very stylized grass. And bursting from the center of the quilt is that tree with 2 large blue flowers, smaller yellow flowers, and bunches of berries. And we get from this the name, the Tree of Life. Their Tree of Life is a very common and very many different kinds of trees of life on quilts throughout quilting history. The stitches on this quilt are just beautiful, and you might notice that there's like a interlocking pattern of stitching on each around the Tree of Life itself. Feathered stitching runs along the vertical sides of the quilt. The Tree of Life itself is an ancient motif that goes back to the Bible and Norse mythology. And when it first was used, I'm sure that it was meant in its many forms to communicate prosperity, and it was actually meant to be a bridge between the earth and heaven. So I'm not sure that meant that to the Rankins, but it certainly would have been a beautiful gift as a quilt. The next one I'm going to show you is another. It's not actually a kit. This was made from a pattern that Dorothy probably got from Marguerite Ickes's Standard Book of Quilt Making in 1949. It's a bridal wreath quilt. There are several different, I called this hearts and flowers, and here's your heart and your flower at the same time. It's in the reds and greens and blues in the tradition of the 19th century, of the 1800s. These types of colors were very common then. There's a green calico frame, and then a green calico border and a red calico frame. There's a pattern of blue backgrounds and the green backgrounds. The green backgrounds makes an X in the middle of the quilt. The heart and wreath pattern is sometimes referred to as a bridal wreath. It's also a very old pattern, comes about sometime around 1840, 1860, and is similar to the Rose of Sharon and Wreath of Roses motifs. This Wreath of Roses, however, is composed of hearts that are meant to look like roses. And that green calico, the vibrant green calico that make the leaves of the wreath, are also the backing of the quilt. Let's go on. So then there's an Amish sampler that no doubt Dorothy made. This is from a pattern. She made it in 1980, started at 87, finished it in 89. And it's kind of a encyclopedia of Amish motifs. So the Amish are quite well known for their quilts. And this kit just took them all and kind of threw them all onto one quilt. You can see that there are some of the vibrant reds and greens of the 19th century again. There's some very distinctive Amish symbols. There's a dove. There's the second panel is a bird and birds and tulips. There's a Amish star. There's this kind of candelabrum of purple tulips, and butterflies and hearts and flowers again. What? And lots of other motifs, which we will see again and again and again. I wanted you to pay attention particularly to this one heart in the green wreath, because where do we see that before? Just like 2 slides ago. It's just so common. And part of this notion of harking back to 19th century quilts comes from in the 70s and 80s. There's a trend towards remembering what America's past. And so you will see that theme again. But a lot of these quilts are traditional because of that. This one was registered in the Illinois Quilt Research Project. It's quilt 343 from Champaign-Urbana and was signed by Dorothy herself. Let's move on. Oh, some more details from the Amish sampler. So there's that little cute little birds and the kind of candelabrum of tulips. Tulips are often a sign of good luck or prosperity in quilts. Next, the Ohio Rose. This was made between 1980 and 1993. So here you go. This is how long it takes to make a quilt sometimes, I guess. This kit came from I love this one because this kit came from the Boag company. It was a quilt company begun in 1932 by a man, George Boag, and he sold these quilt kits, and he did the merchandising basically. But there was a lady named Mary McElwain, Walworth, Wisconsin, and she provided the supplies. So she did all the cutting and the drawing and all the work, but he merchandised the quilts. So this is an Ohio Rose quilt. You'll notice that again, hearts and flowers. The flowers themselves are made out of hearts, heart-shaped petals, and they form an X shape. The X shape is completed by green rose stems terminated in dark pink buds. A dark pink binding creates a top and bottom border, and the border is longer in the top and bottom. And then there's 5 dark pink scallop shapes frame the right and left and central motif. So you can see this is very similar in some ways to the wreath, but then there's also this X shape, and we'll see that X shape again as well. Here's a wreath of roses from the it's a quilt in the Smithsonian from 1840, 1850. So you can see the same tonality. We saw this wreath before, and it's these roses are very common in not, and this is the kind of quilt that our Ohio Rose harkened back to. And I just brought a detail to show you that while lots of Dorothy and Stan's quilts are hand quilted, this one is probably machine quilted. And while there's a very traditional pattern on the quilt, there's a very abstract rose here in the quilting stitching itself. There's a flower there on that little panel on the right, but it's really quite abstract. Here's a favorite. I love this one. I don't know why I love this one. The other ones are also bright and vibrant, but I love this one. It's the oak and acorn quilt. 1976. It's one of the 9 quilts in this collection that were from a pattern created by the Leeward Creative Craft Company, whose home base was actually in Elgin, Illinois. And it was begun in 1976 as a result of the bicentennial, when people showed an interest in traditional crafts. The cross stitch, this is now, we've passed over into the cross stitch quilts. and you can see how much cross stitching there is on this quilt. It's crazy. Not a crazy quilt, crazy cross stitching. There are multiple, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 sets of acorn and oak leaf motifs. There are 4 sets in each one of the blocks. There are 4 sets of acorns that meet each other in a C shape, and then the oak leaves create an X. There's a ribbon-like border with more oak leaves there, and a few, and they're have 2 little acorns on either side of them. These were often sewn in pieced quilts in the 19th century in that bright red and green, and I'll show you that in a minute. But here they're in a more naturalistic color, which is cool. And I think that here's an oak leaf and acorn. You can see the acorns are much more stylized than they were in our quilt. Oh, sorry. These look more like acorns to me. But the oak leaves are a little bit more naturalistic. And I also brought the detail of a gravestone from the 19th century as well, where you have oak leaves and acorns. Well, what are they doing on a gravestone? What are they doing on a quilt? The oak, of course, is a very long-lived and strong and sturdy tree, and has for a very long time been a symbol of strength. The acorn, what happens from acorns? Mighty oaks grow, right? So the acorn has always been a sign of hope. So what more would you want to give to somebody if you were giving this quilt, say for a wedding present, than to give them strength and hope? That's why it's a common motif. And I think it's probably why I like that Rankin quilt myself. Next, Country Sampler, also made in the 70s, also hearkening back to an earlier time, to the glory days, if you will, for some folks, of the United States. Certainly that is the feeling that created the demand for this kind of quilt kit, and the desire to do it. And there's a lot of work on this quilt. Dorothy created it from a Lured company manufactured kit. There's a blue ribbon-like decoration around the outside, and several yellow and pink flower bouquets set within that. And then there are 4 rows of scenes in the center of the quilt, framed by a floral border. The rows are as follows. There are flower baskets flanking the side of the top row, with peacocks in the center. And below that are the numbers 1 through 0. What are they doing there? Well, the thing that this quilt most recalls are the kinds of samplers that young women would sew to prove their ability to sew, so that they would be, for want of a better word, marriageable. They had that skill, and they could mend clothes, they could make clothes, they would have certainly have that skill, and lots of young women would do this. And as you see, the whole alphabet is at the bottom of the quilt. That's what this is recalling, and we'll look at an actual quilt in a moment. But let's look at the scenes a little bit closer. The second scene, the second row of decoration, is a small idyllic farm with a kind of stylized apple tree in the center of it. Cows on the left, sheep on the right, a goat as well, and a tiny little house. People are moving on up in the third horizontal row where there's a 2-story house, an outbuilding, some geese, and the woman is feeding some chickens. And in the bottom row, it looks like we have the prosperity and is rewarded. We've built a church, and we now have, and you can see the detail of this on the left. We now have a farmer who is planting rows of tulips and pumpkins. I love that. With these kinds of motifs, the quilt owner could not be asking for more, but to have a good, long, healthy life and prosper. This quilt was registered with the Illinois Quilt Research Project as well. And here's an actual sampler from 1876. Now, Emma Weston was super talented, and I got it from 1876 because that would have been the centennial of the country. And she has rendered the alphabet in all manner of ways, including, it looks like, in the latest kind of Palmer script, as well as many flowers and animals and houses. So you can see that country sampler was copying some very fine earlier examples. We'll just run through a few more of the cross stitch quilts. This is what would be called a Baltimore's bride's quilt. There are many of these kinds of quilts that are called album quilts, or I called it an encyclopedia before, but it is kind of an encyclopedia. This particular kind with all the flowers were first made in the 1840s in Baltimore, not in cross stitch, in a pieced fashion, and they frequently had baskets of flowers, urns of flowers, tilted baskets of flowers, like on the bottom left and right. There's a very unusual and beautiful wreath of tulip buds here on the top right, and a couple of other types of wreaths and baskets with confronting animals. After the Civil War, they became quite popular, and they were given to, particularly in Baltimore, given to young women as wedding presents, and meant to be heirlooms, not meant to be used, which is kind of funny because when I talked to Stan Rankin's family, they said that Dorothy and Stan would make a quilt and put it away. They wouldn't use them. So they were making the quilt for the sake of making the quilt, art for art's sake, I suppose. And that what's the intention of Baltimore brides quilts. Here's an actual Baltimore brides quilt, and you can see some of the many similar motifs. There are flower baskets, there are flower urns, there are tilted flowers. So you can see that was an intentional copying on the part of the person who made and here's another example, all rendered in pinks, roses, and greens, but the same kind of album quilt. And what are we seeing again but wreaths of roses and candelabrum, basically of tulips, that right in the center top. There's what I would call, I don't know what you actually call it, but it's like a candelabrum of tulips, and the base of it is a heart. So I'm living up to my topic. This was a quilt kit released in 1967 from the Rainbow Block Quilt Company. And the Rainbow Block Quilt Company was so called because they indicated where the little cross stitches should go by the color of the thread that would match it. And so you could have a rainbow of colors on your background that would show you where to stitch that color. They called themselves the quilt block specialists, or the makers of pretty quilts. And I have to agree, it's pretty quilt. There was a company that was in Cleveland, Ohio. And it was particularly common for children's quilts. Let's go someplace completely different here. We're still in the quilt kits. We're still in cross stitching, although there's a little bit of embroidery on this quilt. This was registered by Dorothy in the Quilt Research Project. It was made in 1954, so quite early for them. And it was from a kit produced by the Frederick Hirschner Company of Chicago. It's one of 2 Hirschner quilts in the collection. Under the traditional colors, using the traditional colors of Dutch ceramics. So if you are familiar with Delftware, like that plate on the upper right, you might recognize it. It uses those colors to create a pattern, and you can see there are some somewhat new motifs here. There's what appears to be a snowflake on the upper right. In the second row on the left, there's a rather big kind of urban building. And the second row on the right, again, a 2-towered building. So these are designs from somewhere else. And they do come, as a matter of fact, from Dutch ceramics. While Dutch tiles are usually white with a blue background, the patterns here are reversed, so they're blue with white figures on them. And we could ascribe this to one trend that we've seen over and over again, is like a harking back to the colonial period of the United States. And there were Dutch people here in the colonial period, most particularly in New York, where you have New York might have been New Amsterdam, but for fate. So that's one explanation. Another is just that oftentimes ceramic patterns were transferred back and forth to other, because ceramics travel so easily from one place to another, back and forth from one art form to another. There are other. The Dresden plate, of course, is modeled on a ceramic, and there are 2 other types in this collection. One is there's an Amari. If you get a chance to go to the website, you can see that. And there's also a Violets one that is actually modeled on Ainsley china. Okay, let's move on. Couple of more of the quilt kits, and then we'll get to the original quilts. And so this quilt kit was made by I have a feeling that Stan had a hand in this one, and this one was old cars. We call it the old Cars quilt. It was made in 1985. There are 30 blocks in this with 14 distinct cars, including an 1896 Ford, a 1908 Buick, a 1904 Oldsmobile, and a 1903 Cadillac, and a 1909 Studebaker. And you can see that this is not any longer just cross-stitching, but also embroidery. This was made by the Aunt Martha Transfers, what these blocks came from. And the company changed its name to Aunt Martha around the time of the bicentennial to sound more like Martha Washington. The Rankins were quite fond of nature and the forest preserve, and expressed this through their involvement in Boy Scouts. And so I thought it only right to bring their bird quilt, which is a beautiful quilt with some lovely naturalistic birds in cross stitch and some embroidery. And that is, there's a cardinal and a goldfinch here. This kit was the other quilt from the Hirschner Company in 1977. Now, moving on to original productions. This scrap quilt was made by Stan Rankin, and it employs pieces from numerous quilts within the collection. If you look carefully, you can probably find a couple of pieces that ended up in the Dresden Plate quilt. Most of it quilt is pieced together with irregularly wide but equally tall sizes of squares and rectangles. So all of the pieces are as tall as one another, but they're all different sizes width-wise. And there are 23 horizontal rows. And I thought, how in the heck did he do this? And then I realized, Stan and his mom were both people who did numbers, accountants and bookkeepers, and they can figure out math stuff. So they figured this out pretty easily. And it was, I think, scrap quilts when they were first made were, of course, made for economy. They were used as utilitarian blankets. And I don't think that's what Stan was doing here in 1994. I think he was doing it for the reason that he wanted to use up all the scraps, and he wanted to make something beautiful. And it is beautiful in its own way. This quilt was made in 1991, and it was designed and completed by Stan himself. It's signed by him. It's a block quilt. It has 30 squares, five across and 6 down. The squares contain a large 4-petal rosette with a central hole. So it's kind of like the Dresden square, but it's not. A Dresden plate, but it's not. I mean, it has the scalloped appearance, but those are just actually one big applique there. And there are 6 different plaids used in the making of these rosettes. He must have purposely gone out and looked for this kind of broad plaid in 6 different designs so that he could make this. And it's just so it draws on tradition, but it's so modern in its colors, in its boldness, if you will, in its masculinity. Here's an all Stan production, and I show you Stanley Rankin's initials here and sewn into the corner, and the date of 1988. He designed and executed this quilt, and most, of course, of the other quilts we've seen tonight were created from kits or traditional patterns, but novelty and creativity are the kind of watchwords of the end of the 20th century, and even now in making quilts. And so this University of Illinois quilt certainly makes a bold statement. It's a checkerboard of 195 quilt squares in dark blue and cream, and highlighted above the center is a large square of orange, which is embroidered with the Great Seal of the University of Illinois. And it's the old-fashioned seal with the learning and labor and the symbol of the plow and the anvil and the steam engine. And then the quilt is bound with a Fighting Illini ribbon. I don't know where he found that. And then on each of those squares, of those 195 squares, has a UI stitched into it. A sunburst highlights the Great Seal, and a rope-like pattern in the orange framing is in the orange framing elements. I don't know if you can actually see that in these pictures, but in this orange, there's like a rope around the outside, so it highlights the whole thing more. But what a great original quilt. And then finally, this is the last quilt I'll be showing you tonight. I think of this quilt as the quilt that binds us to the Rankins, because this quilt is published in a book about the Illinois Quilt Research Project. And since Dorothy and Stan spent so much time with the museum volunteering for that project, it is the quilt that binds them to us. But it's also art, and it's human. It's a human production, but it's also it also celebrates nature. So there are 19 different types of leaves on this quilt. There are 42 blocks, and all of the leaves are from trees that are commonly found in Champaign County. Miss Stan, being a Boy Scout leader, had taught the shapes of leaves to his scouts, and he and his mother decided they wanted to make a quilt that represented that. And so you can see here, if you look very carefully, you can see all kinds of quilts, but I'm showing you a few details. Here's an oak leaf. This was made in 1976 too, by the way. And then you can see here, on the left, there's a maple leaf, there's a red bud, there's a bottom left, there's a sweet gum, and top right next to the red bud, you can see just barely, you can see sassafras leaves. This quilt was completed in 1970. And the other thing about this is kind of cool is that that central motif that they made up themselves, that yellow with the red kind of buds coming out of it, reminds me very much of that oak leaf and acorn quilt. It's like they took that pattern, they internalized it and made it into a meaningful local piece of art. And finally, that particular quilt is featured in the book from the Illinois Quilt Research Project called History from the Heart. Now, this book is now out of print, but you can find it easily on Amazon if you want to buy a secondhand copy. And as I said at the beginning, the bequest that Stan Rankin left to the museum, it wasn't just us. He also was a benefactor to the Boy Scouts, to the Monticello Railway Museum, and to Japan House. But for us, it made the difference in a tight budget for a building that we needed to build for our large artifacts. By large artifacts, I mean furniture and plows and so forth. We were able to build that building because of the bequest that Stan left. His family has said that nothing would make him happier than to build that building and take care of historic objects. And so I wanted to show you a picture of where we were at the building. We were able to finally take occupancy in July Everything needs to be inspected and heat treated before it goes into a brand new building. So it's not very full yet, but there's some stuff in there. And there it is. There's the interior. And we really want to thank the Rankins for their great gift. And I am at the point of wanting to stop sharing. And I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barb. And as Barb mentioned, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the comment section down below. We can address those questions here at the end of the program. But what a good presentation! What a good choice of looking just at quilts to not only see that each artifact has such a great story. Each artifact can be its own work of art, and looking at as you mentioned at the very beginning, you can look at the arc of the history of quilt making within this collection, within this exhibit, but then also just see historical influence in one particular area, whether it's people being resourceful by using feed sacks, or just other daily aspects of daily life going into quilt making. So it's just a interesting thing to look at for sure.
Well, that's always a fun thing when you're a museum person, right? Because everything tells more than one story. Like
Right.
Quilts tell the story of what women were doing with their time. They tell the story of what the lack or surplus of resources. They tell a creativity story. They are artistic, but they might also reflect your interests. Like, do you like old cars? Do you like nature? So there's so many stories that could be told from any one thing.
Yeah.
That's the downside of being a museum person, is that you see the world that way.
Yeah. Or in this particular case, telling the great stories of Stan and Dorothy too, in their collection.
Right. I actually gave this talk a different kind of version of it at Windsor this afternoon, and somebody said, where did they have all the time? Like, they made so many quilts, and this is only half of them, so
yeah
it's and I have to admit that I'm not a quilt historian. I'm an art historian, and so I look at these things in terms of what they symbolize, and color and shape, and
Sure.
I'm sure that there are quilt historians out there who could tell me a whole bunch of other things about them, and I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Looking at the comments, again, if you got a question, write it in the comment section. Got Susan. I think this question came in towards the beginning of the program, and I'm unsure of which quilt she's particularly referring to, but she said, is this a whole cloth quilt? Do you happen to know, Barb, any of the quilts that you featured tonight, any of them whole cloth? I mean, I know you mentioned that some of them, had panels and that sorts of thing, but, I'm not a quilt historian either. So do you know if ones from the earlier parts of your presentation were whole cloth quilts, or any from your presentation tonight were whole cloth quilts?
Yes, I think the first one was a whole cloth quilt.
And which one was that?
The Drunkard's Path.
Gotcha. Yeah.
If that's what she's asking.
The red and white one at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know which one she's referring to now, so it's kind of hard to answer, but
sure.
I'm pretty sure that one is. So Susan, write back and tell us.
And if you want to check out, these quilts that Barb talked about in her talk tonight, as well as, several others that she didn't have time to get to in tonight's presentation, I'm dropping a link to that online exhibit again in the comment section here. Check out that online exhibit for yourself, and get some more information on these quilts and ones that couldn't be featured tonight. I got some other folks tuning in, giving some praise. Dennis, thanks for sharing this. Thanks for tuning in, Dennis. Familiar
Cool.
face, Mark. Great job, Barb, from Mark. Karen says thank you. Susan says thanks. So she's still tuning in here.
Good.
And Paul also says thank you. So thanks to everybody for tuning in tonight for tonight's program. Not seeing any other questions come in at this moment, but if you watch this after the live stream, we have a question here from Paul real quick. Last question of the night. Paul says, can any of these be seen in person? Any of these quilts be seen in person, Barb, at the moment? Or how could folks get a closer look at some of these quilts?
No, at the moment, all of the quilts were sold. There is a possibility that sometime in the future, and we'll be sure to let you know, that we might be able to show a few of them, but they have been dispersed, so you can't see them in person, unfortunately. But we are in touch with Stan's family, and they have offered, so it's possible that in the future we would show them, but I can't make any promises.
And they were sold, you mentioned at the beginning of the program,
to support Japan House.
To support Japan House, yeah.
One of Stan's many other one of the many things he supported.
Sure.
He has an adoptive family, and they are they have been very, very involved in Japan House. So that is where those went. Yeah. We do have lots of quilts in our collection, Paul. So you should come see us at least once a year so you can see if any of them are out. And now Mark's going to tell me that it wasn't such a great presentation. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Norma also says thank you. Very interesting presentation. My favorite was the bird quilt. Yeah, Barb, what was your favorite quilt if you had to pick one?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. When I was given part of this talk at Windsor this afternoon, I said, this is my favorite. And then I said, I think I've said that 10 times before. I really, for some bizarre reason, maybe it's because it's not all pastel colored and so forth, but I really like the acorn and oak leaf quilt. But I'm very partial to oak trees, so that's probably why. Because we had the biggest oak tree in the world in my backyard when I was a kid. Well, at least I thought it was. And I've always been a lover of oak trees, and I think that's why I like that quilt. It's different.
Yeah.
It's not really, really colorful, and it's just kind of subtle. So, yeah. But the interplay of the acorns as they kind of curl around, and the very stiff, and that contrasts with the stiff oak leaves. Oh my gosh, here comes the art historian. Shut her up. That's why I like that one.
I took notice.
What's your favorite?
I like the Tree of Life quilt. I liked it because it was colorful and just the intricacies of it, and the old Cars quilt was different. So that I found that interesting too.
That was really fascinating. So the patterns for those are really interesting because they were like, you can still find those patterns online. Aunt Martha still sells those same patterns, and they're just like, you pick up one from here and one from there and put it together. It's very strange. Yeah. So anyway, Blowbaum is right down the road.
That's right. So come and see us, Paul.
Come see us, Paul. There's always something fun to see. So
that's right.
Come on down.
Yeah. Karen says her favorite was the last one with all the leaves. Karen
That is
says.
a beautiful quilt. I will give you that. It is just fascinating how they managed to distinguish a sweet gum from a maple, because they look pretty similar even in nature, but on that quilt you can tell what the leaves are. I mean, it's a masterwork. It's really probably the best one. I love it.
All good. Hard to pick a favorite.
Yeah.
But
Well, come back on Sunday when I yak about about Abe Lincoln.
yeah, join us on Sunday, this Sunday, February 13th at 2 o'clock. Abe Lincoln's birthday coming up here pretty soon.
I don't know what calendar I was looking at when I scheduled myself for twice in 1 week.
Hey, get 2 Barb presentations in 1 week out there, folks. So yeah, join us on Sunday for that, discussing Abe Lincoln through photography with a little local spin as well. So thanks, Barb, for a great presentation tonight.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you always for running the show. It's a great relief to not have to do it myself.
Well, I enjoy doing it.
Good.
And
Thanks.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to those of you here at the end, providing some comments and some questions. And one final thing, just wanted to remind folks, again, I dropped that link in the chat there to check out the online exhibit on our website, Hearts and Flowers Quilts from Stan and Dorothy Rankin. And then also one last thing, just reminding you again, complete a short and simple survey that I dropped in the comment section just now. Click that link to complete this survey. That should only take you about 5-ish minutes. Let us know what you thought about tonight's program and any ideas you may have for future programs that you'd like to see us do. Leave that information in this survey. So for Barb, for myself, Museum of the Grand Prairie, Champaign County Forest Preserve District, appreciate you again tuning in tonight, and we will see you again next time. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening. Until next time.
Thank you. Bye.